sharing, and I pass on to you. Yumin, please.
Okay.
Oh, I forgot. If you have questions afterwards, after this talk, make an exclamation mark in the chat or raise your hand or make yourself somehow known and heard. Thanks.
Okay. Martin, can you see my presentation?
Yes, that looks perfect to me.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Many thanks to Martin and Emily for giving me a chance to present at this seminar about what we have done in the past 10 years. So my talk is about the Chinese learners and its implications for the diverse mid-Pleistocene monsoon transition. And this research was actually supervised by Professor Zhishen An, and with significant contributions from Professor Qiuzhen Yin, who is a modelers, and also as well as more than 10 international collaborators and some of my former students. I cannot list all of them, the name of them here. And today is the third seminar. We know that the concept, characteristics, and possible mechanism of the IMPT have already been extensively discussed in early talks, focused on ice core and marine records. So my presentation will focus on Chinese learners, a unique terrestrial archive of past global climate change. So the word "lers" is originally from German, "Loisi" by Leyer, and in Chinese historical documents, "lers" was first mentioned as "huangtu" or yellow dust. "Huangtu" means yellow dust, and about 2,000 years ago. So this map actually shows the globally distribution of lers deposit. You can say the Eolian lers are mainly distributed in the mid-latitude regions of the Northern Hemisphere, from North America and Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and East Asia. And the thickness and timing of lers deposits in different regions are totally different. So you can say ranging from tens to hundreds of meters, and spanning from the past 2.5 or 1.5 to actually in China is back to 25 million years ago. So here are some pictures show the lers profiles from different regions. From the you can say the lers paleosoil sequence are spatially different. If you just say the color, is very clearly in China, especially in the Chinese lers plateau. And so why we study Chinese lers? That's because the lers formation and its implications for the monsoon variability evolution are closely related to climate changes in both high and low latitude regions. Firstly, lers is a kind of Eolian deposits transported from the Gobi and the sandy desert in Western China by the winter monsoon or by the westerly jet. The aridity in these south regions and also the intensity of the westerly and winter monsoon are closely related to the changes in Northern Hemisphere ice sheet. So that's why lers deposits in China is related to the high latitude climate change. And after dust deposition, the paleosoil was formed under a warm and wet summer season, and due to the increased moisture transport from the low latitude ocean. So in this case, we can imagine that the paleosoil sequence or the pathogenic imprints in the Chinese lers deposits can reflect the low latitude hydroclimate signals. So the most notable lerse deposits is distributed in this region. It's actually along the mid-reach of the Yellow River. So this region we call the Chinese Lerse Plateau. And over the past 50 years, I think, and there have many famous lerse sections being studied. For example, the Luochuan here is the very classical lerse sections in China and also very famous in the world. And also recently we have some new high sedimentation rate lerse record from the Western China here, and here is in the northern slope of the Kunlun Mountains, and also 427 meters core from the northwestern plateau, and another more than 600 meters red clay core from the western plateau. I'll just show you some example. There are more than, I think, 20 or 30 lerse profiles have already been studied in recent decades. Here I would like to show you several pictures how the Chinese lerse palaeosaurs looks like. So the upper two pictures show the lerse palaeosaur sequence after the MPT. So here, the reddish layer is palaeosaur formed during warm and humid interglaciers, and then this yellowish lerse layers was accumulated during cold and dry glacier times. So if just count from the uppermost part to, you can say the S1, S1, L2, S3, then here is the S5, here is the L9. So it's easily can count the lerse palaeosaur layer sequence in the outcrops. For example, here, this is thin reddish palaeosaur layers, S3, corresponding to marine isotope stage 9. And these two pictures show the lerse palaeosaur sequence after the MPT. Then these two pictures show the lerse palaeosaur sequence before the MPT. If you just say the color difference, okay, you also say you can say the similar color changes between reddish palaeosaur and then yellowish lerse layers. But if you look at the thickness of the lerse and the palaeosaur, you can see some difference. For example, for upper part of the lerse palaeosaur sequence, the thickness of lerse is much thicker than the palaeosaur layers. So we can think about this actually is 100 K cycles, but before the MPT, the thickness of lerse and palaeosaurs are most identical. So the dominant cycle from the lerse palaeosaur sequence before the MPT is around 41 Ka cycle. So these four pictures is from the central lerse plateau. Why I mentioned that, I will tell you the story. If we move westward to the western plateau, you will see a different, you will got different feeling about the lerse palaeosaur sequence and its implications for the optical scale monsoon variability. So again, here is a picture also from the central lerse plateau, and here the red curve is the magnetic susceptibility, which is a good indicator for the summer monsoon intensity. So this curve, if you look at the higher susceptibility means interglacier palaeosaurs, and lower susceptibility means glacier lerse layers. So the MPT, if you judge the MPT from this curve, it's started from here and around 1.2 million years, and we can say ended around here is 0.9 million years ago. If we look at outcrop, there have two marker layers. We call the upper sand layer L9 here, and corresponding to the end of the MPT, and the lower sand layer L15 is around the 1.2 millimeters, corresponding to the onsite of the MPT. Also, they have another marker layers we call the L33 bottom sand layers, and corresponding to the onsite of the major northern hemisphere glaciation. Below this layer, this is reddish red clay. So it means from Pliocene red clay to Pleistocene Lurs-Paleosoil sequence, you can judge from the color change and also from the anthelations between Lurs and Paleosoil. It's very easy from the outcrop. But the question is, when we know that there have both Chinese Lurs and the Speleotherm are two excellent archives document orbital scale monsoon variability. So this curve is the Speleotherm oxygen isotope record, and these two record are the magnetic stability from the Chinese Lurs Plateau. So what I want to emphasize is this curve is from the central Lurs Plateau. Okay, this blue curve is from the western Lurs Plateau. You just look at the interglaciers. So the Speleotherm have very clear precession cycle. And if you look at the Lurs magnetic stability, your first feeling is that they have glacier, interglacier and glacier contrast. Okay, and so the question is, most of Lurs proxies show very clear glacier interglacier fluctuations coupled with ice volume change, but Speleotherm oxygen isotope record shows strong precession cycles linked to insulation forcing. So then we want to ask whether East Asian monsoon is mainly driven by ice volume with 100K cycle, or by insulation with 21 or 20,000 years 20,000 years cycle. So because I'm a Lurs researcher, so I'm just thinking, so why the precession signal was not well identified in the Lurs-Paleosoil sequence from the central Lurs Plateau. And then we move to Western China. Before I talk about the Lurs-Paleosoil sequence from the Western China, I would like to show there are 8 Lurs sections have already been well studied, especially for the last interglacial Paleosoil. So when we compile all those mean green size and the magnetic stability record from this 18 Paleosoil or last interglacial Paleosoil profiles over Lurs Plateau, we will find that in the western Lurs Plateau, we call the ridge tab A. So here is the blue one is the mean green size, the red one is the magnetic stability. So in this region, we can say very clear precession cycles for the last interglacial periods, okay? And then we move to this region, we call tab B, and we look at the magnetic stability and mean green size. Okay, for the susceptibility or the summer monsoon variation, we do say the precession cycles here, but for the mean green size or the winter monsoon indicator, we cannot say very clear the precession cycles. Then we move to the central Lurs Plateau, this region, and for both magnetic stability and the green size record, we cannot say very clear precession cycles. So that means the precessional signals are spatially different. Then we wonder why. We put, let me say, it's 9 very good Lurs Paleosoil last interglacial Lurs profiles from the southeastern to northwestern Lurs Plateau. Is actually is a kind of a transect. So when you say the last interglacial paleosoil in the southeastern or in the central plateau is a soil complex. But when you move to western plateau or the northern plateau, so you will see three sublayers of weakly developed paleosoils. So these three layers actually is the precessional cycles. So the answer to this spatial difference is because in the western plateau, the sedimentation rate is very high. It's around the 3 to 5 times higher than those in the central plateau. And also in the western plateau, the pedogenesis is relatively weak. So when the pedogenesis is weak, that means the mixing or the smoothing effect will be dumped. So that's why in the western plateau, we can see very clear precession cycles in Chinese earth deposits. So to address whether this precession cycles were persistent in high sedimentation earth record from the western plateau, we conducted a earth streaming project since 2012, and we got five high sedimentation rate earth cores from western to in the western plateau they are Gulang and Lingxia, Jingyuan, and in northern plateau is Dingbian, and here is an exception. The Mangshan is also has very high sedimentation rate. So here I just want to focus on 427 meters core drilled from this side, from Jingyuan. Okay, so here the average sedimentation rate is around 25 centimeters per 1,000 years, about 4 times higher than those in the central earth plateau. And if you look at the outcrop, so here, if you eyes are very sharp, you can see here the reddish color. This is actually the marine isotope stage 5E, but you cannot say, well, it's 5C and 5A. But if you drill a core from this side, here you can say these three sublayers. So this may be 5A and then 5C and then 5E. And if we compare the high sedimentation rate earth core with the core taken from the central plateau, so this is also the last interglacial paleosoil in the Weinan, actually is at this site. So the thickness of the last interglacial paleosoil ice is only 2 or 3 meters, but in the western part is 9 meters. So because of the sedimentation rate is very high, so we can see during the last glaciation, the green size record from the Earth sequence in this region show very clear Danziger, Ossiger, and also Henrik events. And this is for the green size record. If we go further, use the carbon isotope record, this deep blue one, this proxy is related to the monsoon-induced vegetation change. So we can think about, we can consider this carbon isotope of Earth's carbonate is an indicator of the summer monsoon intensity. So here we can also see this positive carbon isotope corresponding to the Henrik-like events. And this is for the last glaciation, and this is for the last interglacier. So we can see precessional cycles, 5A and 5C and 5E, and also several millennial scale abrupt monsoon event around here. So what I want to say is about emphasizing about with high sedimentation rate Earth's paleosoil sequence. If you use very sensitive proxy such as the carbon isotope, you can get a very different understanding on the monsoon variability at both precession and the millennial scale time scales. And then we just extend the Earth's carbon isotope record back to the last three climate cycles. So this blue one again is the carbon isotope of Earth's carbonate, and this is the speleotherm oxygen isotope. So we do spectral analysis, and then the Earth's carbon isotope record show very clear 141 and 23 Ka cycles. So implying that the East Asia summer monsoon is probably gently driven by both ice volume and insolation. And so this kind of spectral features are different from the speleotherm oxygen isotope record. So then we go further back to the last 900 million years. Okay, this curve is the carbon isotope, and this blue one is the mean green size. So we can just consider the green size is the winter monsoon variability. Okay, and then this one is the summer monsoon variation. So overall, there's carbon isotope show significant glacier interglacier contrast, but also have very distinctive precession cycles, like here and here, and also you say during the marine isotope stage 16, you do say precession cycle here. And if we compare our carbon isotope record with the methane record from the EPICA, the Antarctic ice core, you can say these two record match very well. So that means in some case, the Earth's carbon isotope record should have some global significance for understanding past climate change. And because just now we're talking about the Earth's carbon isotope after MPT, to investigate how Earth's carbon isotope changed before the MPT. So we mentioned we got a 427 meters core, and then we dating this core. So we based on the paleomagnetic result of this Jingyuan core, we found that the base age of this core is younger than 1.77 million years, because we do not see the Ordway subchron in our Earth core. Then we used another dating method. That is the aluminum 26 and the beryllium 10 barrier dating on the underlying the sandy layers here. So we got 3 ages is ranging from 1.6 to 1.8 million years. So that means the bottom age of this Jingyuan core is younger than 1.7 million years. Then we can extend our Earth's carbon isotope record back to 1.7 million years. This is blue curve. Okay, this is the summer insolation, and then this is the benthic oxygen isotope record. So we do wavelet spectral analysis of these two time series. We will see our Earth's carbon isotope record show a shift from 21,000 year cycles before 1.2 million years to a combination of 21, 41, and 100 K cycles after 0.7 million years. So that means the MPT features in Earth's carbon isotopes differs from the marine oxygen isotope record. So this is typically from the 41 to 100 K cycles across the MPT. So this the strong precession cycles is not only in our Earth record. We just try to compare the record from other monsoon region, like the India summer monsoon and also the Africa monsoon. So the strong precession cycles before the MPT are also seen in different part of the world, such as this is the India summer monsoon record from southwestern China, a Paleolithic record. So the spectral results show both the 3 and 41 Ka cycles. And this is our Earth carbon isotope record. And this is the color proxy from the Mediterranean sea sediments. It's actually a proxy of the African monsoon. I think the spectral result also show very strong 23 and 100 K cycles. So the very strong precession cycle in these two monsoon-related proxies differ from the basic oxygen isotope record, and the later show very strong 41 K cycles.
You've been
so therefore
25 minutes.
Okay. So strong to understand the different optical scale changes recorded in Chinese lakes, speleothem, and the lake sediments, we also try to analyze the simulated temperature, precipitation, and southerly wind changes in hard CM3 model result. So we just focus on northern China and southern China. So the red diagram show the simulated summer temperature, summer southerly wind, and the summer precipitation, and also the annual temperature and the annual precipitation change over the last 26 million years ago. So what I want to emphasize is that those simulated precipitation or temperature changes are different in both region and seasonal scales. The MPT is very evident in changes in the annual mean temperature and precipitation, but not very evident in the summer signals. And especially in northern and southern China, you will see in the southern China, the MPT is more evident than the temperature and the precipitation changes in the northern China. So further, we compare our record, the proxy record with the simulated temperature and precipitation change. So this is the pollen record from the Zorgai Basin in the northeastern margin Tibetan Plateau, and this is the speleothem oxygen isotope record. This is our Earth carbon isotope record. Here, I want to say, based on the proxy and the model result comparison, we can get a better understanding on the proxy. For example, the pollen record from the Zorga Basin mostly reflected the mean annual temperature change. For the speleothem oxygen isotope record, it seems mainly reflect the summer precipitation signal, but for our Earth carbonate is closely related to the annual mean precipitation change. So that means the summer precipitation and the mean annual precipitation, they have different imprints of the orbital and the insolation forcing. So in summary, comparison of between Chinese Earth and other archives, we think that the sensitive monsoon proxies from high resolution Earth record reveal persistent precessional cycles across the MPT, or actually during the Pleistocene. And the MPT characteristics in terrestrial and the Escos record could be different because those proxy indicators, the response of these proxies to temperature and precipitation may be dissimilar. And further, if we think about the mechanism, the effects of insolation and the ice sheet on temperature and the precipitation might be regionally and seasonally different. That's why in our archives from the land and the ocean and ice core, we do say diverse manifestations of the MPT. So finally, we also want to thank the fundings from the NSFC and the Chinese Academy of Science and the Ministry of Science and Technology. And also thank you again for your listening the Chinese Earth stories. That's my talk.
Thank you very much.
For giving us the opportunity to speak here today. So the way that this is going to work is I am first going to present a summary of some of the various proxy records we have at Lake Elgegikin that span the MPT. And then I'm going to turn it over to Julie, and Julie's going to present like a wider picture view of some of the changes that are happening in the Bering Strait region throughout the MPT. And Julie will also be advancing the slides for me. So next slide, please. Okay, so I think a lot of people have probably heard about the Lake Elgegikin or Lake E drilling project. So Lake E is a meteorite impact crater. It's located just above the Arctic Circle in eastern Russia. And it was drilled in 2009. So the bottom of this meteorite impact is 3.6 million years, and it has a continuous sedimentary record. This record is really unique because there are currently few lacustrine records that span the MPT, and the Lake E record is currently the only one from the Arctic. Next slide. And so we're going to jump right in and start taking a look at some of the different records that have been generated from this core. So the plots on the left come from a study from Franca and co-authors in 2013, published in Climate in the Past. And here they looked at grain size as well as the different sediment facies throughout the core. And both the grain size and the sediment facies show a strong correspondence to what's happening with climate. So plotted in this plot are the last 2.5 million years of the Lake E record. And along the top, you can see where the MPT interval is labeled. So first of all, this record has a strong response to the different glacial and interglacial cycles. So during warm periods, there's generally coarser grain sediments being deposited. During colder periods, you have finer grain sediments being deposited. If we look at that MPT interval, most of these records don't display any sort of long-term trend throughout the MPT. A few of them, like for example, if you look at the percent silt plot, maybe has a slight trend throughout there. But overall, I would say there's not much like long-term trend happening throughout the MPT. If you look at the evolutionary power spectrum at the top, here we can see, so Julie, can you click? So if you look at that white box, this is highlighting the eccentricity bands. And so with the eccentricity, we see that initial, whoops, can you go back, Julie?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Other way.
There we
Back
go.
one more. Back one more. Previous slide. Yeah, here. So on the bottom there in the eccentricity band of the grain size record, we start to see an initial onset about 1.25 million years ago. Then there's this interval in there where there's low power from about 1 million years to 800,000 years ago. And then since 800,000 years ago in the eccentricity band, it's strong power. The obliquity signal in the grain size record is strongest between about 950,000 years ago and 670,000 years ago. But then the strength decreases in the younger sediments. And if you look now to the precession band, which is highlighted now in that white box, so initially there's a strong precession cycle from about 1.1 million years to 900,000 years ago. Then it's sort of weak or absent and then appears in the very most recent part of the record. Okay, next slide. So one thing that's interesting about the Lake E proxies is that everything has been measured on the same core now. And all of these studies I'm presenting are using the same age model. And what we're going to see is that these signals, especially the orbital cycles, are expressed somewhat differently in the different proxies in this record. So in this plot, we are now looking at some geochemistry results. This is a study from Volker Wenrich and co-authors published in 2014 in Climate of the Past. They looked at total organic carbon, TIC, and different XRF elemental ratios. Main take-home points here is that throughout the MPT interval, and actually for the whole last 1.2 million years, most of these records do not display any sort of long-term overall trend, but they do have a strong response to glacial interglacial variability. So one of the proxies that's highlighted, talked about a lot in this paper is the rubidium to strontium ratio. Basically, this ratio shows higher values during glacial periods and lower values during interglacial periods. And now if we look to the evolutionary power spectrum of this, so Julie, can you click, please? So in the eccentricity band, we see that it strengthens after about 600,000 years. And it also seems to be present in the earlier part of the record between about 1.2 and 1 million years. And it has this sort of gap in the middle where we don't see any eccentricity. Click again, Julie. And then in the obliquity band, click one more time, we see the strong obliquity signal throughout much of the MPT, but also extending back prior to the MPT. There's a pretty strong obliquity signal in the XRF elemental ratios. And then click one more time. And then up in the precession band, we see basically weak precession is seen in this record after about 500,000 years. There's also some precession around 1 million years. All right, next slide. Okay, so in my group at UMass, a number of my former students and postdocs have looked at the organic geochemistry of Lake E sediments. And in particular, we focus on two groups of proxies. The first are called branched glycerol dialkyl glycerol tetraethers, or branched GGTs. Some example structures are shown on the left side there. There's actually many more of these compounds. These are bacterial membrane lipids. They're produced in situ in lakes, and they differ both in the number and position of the methyl branches as well as the rings. Methylation for these group of compounds has been shown to be a function of temperature. And so the proxy we're using today is called the MBT prime 5 methyl index. The equation is given at the bottom of the screen there on the left. And those letters and numbers just refer to just like the different groups and different structures of the branch GDTs. There are several different calibrations to convert an MBT value to temperature. So there's several different Lacustrine calibrations. They all give somewhat similar results. So the overall pattern will remain the same regardless of the calibration applied, but the absolute value of the temperature reconstructed will differ between calibrations. The other group of proxies we've looked at are plant waxes. So an example structure is shown at the top of the right-hand side of the screen. So we're looking at the N-alkanes here. This is a simple straight chain hydrocarbon. Those with 25 to 35 carbon atoms are produced by higher land plants, and they get transported to the lake via wind and water. The proxy we're going to look at today is the average chain length of the N-alkanes. So it's basically a weighted mean of these different chain lengths of the N-alkanes. And at Lake E, we interpret this as reflecting large-scale vegetation changes on the landscape. At some locations, changes in ACL has been associated with changes in temperature or precipitation. Okay, next slide. So here are some plots from a study from Kurt Lindberg et al. 2022. So Kurt was actually an undergraduate in my lab a few years ago and generated these records. And so along the top, we can see the different marine isotope stages in the global benthic stack labeled. And the two records we're taking a look at are the temperature reconstruction. So that is the middle record. So it's in red. And then the orange shading is the calibration error, which is about plus or minus, I think, 2.2 degrees for the specific calibration that we have plotted here. And below it is the average chain length record. And I'll talk more about that, the average chain length record on the next slide. So just a few things. Like those other proxies we've seen so far from the Lake E record, we don't see any long-term trends in the temperature throughout the MPT. Like we don't see a long-term cooling here. However, we do see that our temperature record does closely track our glacial interglacial cycles. Julie, can you click, please? And in particular, we see some specific interglacials that were particularly warm at Lake Elgagickin. So these include marine isotope stages 21, 27, and 29. And interestingly, these were all warmer than stage 31. So marine isotope stage 31 is recognized globally as a very warm interglacial. In the Lake E pollen record and some other proxies, it's been identified as a super interglacial period. But actually in our temperature records, these other interglacials are standing out as actually being warmer than stage 31. And there's a lot of evidence from other proxy records, both marine and land records from around the North Pacific region, that stage 21 was especially warm and long interglacial around the whole North Pacific area. If we turn our attention now to the power spectrum at the top, we can see both significant obliquity and precession cycles over the MPT in the Lake E record. Here we see the obliquity record is strongest prior to 1 million years ago. And in the longer wavelengths, we see increased variabilities after about 900,000 years. But here we see in our temperature record, we actually find an 82,000 year cyclicity, which is maybe a twice an obliquity signal rather than being eccentricity. A really interesting feature here is that we also see a half precession signal present at Lake Elgagickin. It's strongest in our record between about 1 million years and 850,000 years ago. And there's quite a few records from around the North Pacific that also see a half precession signal. The cause is not really known. Some studies have suggested it might be to nonlinear feedbacks within the whole climate system. Other studies have suggested that it could be a low latitude signal that is being transmitted via oceanographic and atmospheric teleconnections from the low latitudes up to the high latitudes. But just wanted to point out that we don't really know the cause of this, but just wanted to point out that we do see a strong precession signal during the MPT in our Lake E temperature record. Next slide. And so here we have a summary of our vegetation proxies. So the average chain length of our N-alkanes is shown in brown on this plot, and shown in the teal color is a landscape openness index. And this is based on pollen data that was published by Zhao et al. In 2018 in Boreas. So basically, broadly over the MPT, these two proxies, plant waxes and the pollen landscape openness index, broadly agree. The pollen data itself shows a strong response to glacial interglacial variability. So glacials have a higher percent of herbaceous taxa. This reflects an open landscape and cold and arid conditions. During interglacials, we see more tree and shrub pollen. And throughout the MPT, you can see this arrow now highlighting a shift that we see in the landscape openness index. And particularly after about 890,000 years ago, there's an increasingly open landscape seen around the lake. And again, the chain length, the average chain length from our plant waxes broadly reflects these broad changes in the pollen data. So the authors, Zhao et al. Suggested that based on the pollen data, that there was either a long-term cooling or drying trend throughout the MPT. But as we saw in the last slide, our temperature data shows a response to glacial interglacial cyclicity, but does not have a long-term trend throughout the MPT. And so therefore, we think that during the MPT, the Lake E region experienced a drying trend. And now I will turn it over to Julie to continue the second half of the talk.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yes, great. Okay, so that drying trend that Isla talked about across the MPT got us thinking about, of course, the continentality of the Lake Elgin region relative to the opening and closing of the Bering Strait. So this map here from Jeff Bond is just to remind you of the location of the Bering Strait and, of course, the Lake Elgin record. Now, the opening of the Bering Strait has been recently redated and confirmed, particularly both on the Alaskan side, on the Pacific side of the Bering Strait, and also in redating of materials in the Icelandic, interbedded with the Icelandic volcanic and basalt flows. And this paper by Hall et al. Basically assessed the interchange between the Pacific and the Atlantic to suggest that, in fact, since about 5.5 million years ago to almost about 1 million years ago, the Bering Strait had to be open and was not closed during that period of time. So what are the implications? Let's think about that for a second. So even in this record, this is from Ken Miller, if you notice on this paper, this is going back to 3 million years. And of course, you see in red are the super interglacials that we have here. But there's a line here drawn across right around minus 50 meters, which is the sill depth of the Bering Strait. That also suggests that global sea level, eustatically driven, was above the depth of the sill for most of the time up until the MPT. And that after the MPT, then there was a closure, the first closure. This is substantiated by this work looking at the production of intermediate water in the North Pacific, which becomes enhanced once the Bering Strait closes, presumably for the first time in isotope stage 22 and 23, there around 900,000 years ago. So when I first saw this record, I thought to myself, wait a minute, this place is tectonically active. How can it suddenly close all of a sudden at this point in time? But I think we need to really reconsider this, and it's an area of ongoing research to try to bring all of the different components, both the ocean and the land records together, and the tectonicist to really think about this. This paper here sorry, that's supposed to be 2022 in paleo, sorry, the typo there. This paper looked at a 3 million year long record from the Arctic Ocean using neodymium and also strontium proxies for erosion from different, essentially provenance isotopes that give you the origin of the silt and the fine-grained materials that are in these cores. And the upshot of this is that they argue that, in fact, the Bering Strait stays open until, again, about the MPT. And that only after that do you start to get a very strong signal of Laurentide style deep erosion. So again, it suggests that the Laurentide ice sheet got much bigger after the MPT. And I think if you look at the Miller curve, that's basically what it also says there. I want to also highlight this story from Leonid Polyak, and of course, I saw Tom Cronin's online as well. Both of these gentlemen have suggested that prior to the MPT, the Arctic Ocean only had seasonal ice. So it was ice-free or nearly so in the summertime. And that only after, but particularly after stage 11, you started to have perennial ice. And so this suggests that perhaps an open Bering Strait prior to the MPT maintained an ice-free Arctic summers, and that only once the Bering Strait closed and the ice sheets got bigger. So there's a big question of which came first, of course. So this is really interesting because we're about to launch into, in the next couple of decades, an ice-free summers in the Arctic. So our impression is that's going to cause the demise of the Greenland ice sheet. So it's possible that maybe the reason we see more super interglacials prior to the MPT may be because the world was a little more susceptible, and of course leads to be seen how often did the Greenland ice sheet disappear during the time prior to the MPT. So I just like to point out here toward closing that the tectonics of the Bering Strait is not simple. We have the subduction of the North Pacific Plate underneath the Aleutian Arc, and of course that causes uplift in the region of the Bering Strait. We also know the Bering Plate is rotating clockwise, and it causes an opening in the Bering Strait. And of course, Dave Hopkins and I mapped the shorelines around Seward Peninsula, and if you look at the tilt on those shorelines and extend them out toward the Diomede Islands, and here's the Bering Strait, here's the Seward Peninsula, and these dashed lines here show you the proximity of the grabens that are being formed. And the top of the Diomede Islands, these flat wave-cut platforms, are at around 360 meters above present, and they line up perfectly with the Pliocene shorelines that we've mapped back on Seward Peninsula. So you've got uplift of the Bering Strait caused by the subduction of the North Pacific Plate, and then a rotation of it. So is there, in fact, a tectonic component to the first closing of the Bering Strait, if this is true, at around 900,000 years ago? And what were the implications for that cutoff in circulation between the Atlantic and the Pacific at that time? So I'm just proposing a question. I think we need to get together as a science community and think about, what did that open Bering Strait look like? How open is open? You know, how is it complete? How deep does that sill have to be in order to explain the signals that we're seeing? And so I think that this binary view that we have a land bridge that exists during glaciation and a gateway during interglacials is probably oversimplified. We need to really confirm and think about the first closure of the Bering Strait during the MPT, and what were the implications for that. And so we have a lot more to think about. And then also, what is it? Is there additional information we can get out of the Lake Elgagitkin record to tell us about those changes in continentality? So we'll just summarize here by saying that the MPT is expressed differently from different proxies, as Isla showed you, from the various methods that have been applied. The temperature record does not seem to show a very long-term cooling. Obliquity signal is strongest prior to the 1 million years, and half precescent cycle is present and strongest across the MPT. The vegetation shows a long-term drying trend across the MPT. And we'd like to propose that tectonic controls on the Bering Strait should also be important in terms of evaluating the openness of the strait and the fluctuations between the Pacific, and maybe its implications and influence on cooling the Arctic and causing an expansion of the Laurentide ice sheet. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much to both of you. There any questions?